Welcome, Professor Krondorfer from the Martin-Springer-Instiute at the Northern Arizona University. I'm glad you made the trip to the old continent of Europe, and we will have a conversation about your institute, your work, and I'm Matthias Gockel from the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies, Friedrich-Schiller-Universität Jena, and I've prepared a few questions for you, so I hope these questions will be inspiring.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, okay, great. So let's just start. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your biographical background, how you developed an interest in the topic of reconciliation and other related topics, and maybe also tell us a bit about the projects of your institute.
Yeah, I can do so. So currently I'm the director of the Martin-Springer-Institute in Flagstaff in Arizona, northern Arizona. It's a big university there. The institute was founded by a Holocaust survivor from Będzin in Poland and her American husband, with the idea that based on the experiences and lessons of the Holocaust, we need to think about what needs to be done today. Where are the conflict zones? What are the issues that need to be addressed and talked about? With my experience in bringing groups in conflict together, they decided that I would be a good person to lead that institute, and I've been working there for the last 1.5 years.
Okay.
I was born in Germany, and I came to the United States in the early 1980s and have been living there for about 30 years now.
30 years.
Yeah. So I've lived and grew up in different cultures, and that's how I see myself very much. Sometimes as a translator between the American culture and the German culture.
And who was Martin Springer, or who is Martin Springer?
Martin Springer is actually, it's two names. The current family name is Martin, and her name, the survivor's name, is Doris Springer. And so they combined her maiden name and her current married name into one. So really it doesn't, if you just hear the name, it doesn't tell you much. What we say is we do global engagement through Holocaust awareness. And I probably should say also that I'm a professor for comparative religious studies.
Okay, so that's your academic background.
That is my academic background.
Religious studies, yes, okay. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at the Institute. You mentioned mediation work. And what is particular about your approach to mediation?
Yeah, at the Institute we have a number of educational programs we run, but among them is to think about how we can get groups who are in conflict to speak to each other in a different way. You can call it mediation, you can call it reconciliation work, you can call it dialogue work. There are different models for different times. One of the programs we just instituted is called Racial Reconciliation Seminar, where we bring students, US students, together from different ethnic, racial, cultural backgrounds and do a 5-day retreat workshop with various methods to allow them to explore the questions they don't like to talk about. Everyone knows race is an issue in the United States, but hardly anyone really wants to talk about it outside of an academic setting and really think about it through personal terms and life histories. And so the students that come together, we tell them, you don't have to read anything. You yourself are our books, and you open the pages to your life story, and you tell us a little bit about that. And that's one thing. It's for students. These are students between 20 and 23 years old. For them, it's usually the first experience of this kind of work, and we go carefully with that one. But that's just one example of the kind of work we do there. We've done, or I've done, lots of different groups in conflict work since, I'd say, the mid-1980s. And we probably want to talk about this eventually today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I can imagine that sometimes it's not so easy that people open up themselves a little bit. Do you have a strategy or a specific trick maybe that you apply?
Anyone who comes to our seminars kind of try to explain to them what to expect, but for many people it's hard to exactly understand what it is. They do understand that it's not a regular educational academic program. It is a program where you explore yourself in the context of a group. And but beyond that, we create an atmosphere of trust and an atmosphere of protection. We kind of make clear that, that people in the room are protected. It's not a public space. It's not necessarily a private space either. It's somewhere in between. And that we encourage them slowly, one step after the other, to take a little bit more of a risk. We ask them to be direct. We ask them not to play word games. And we have ways to, how would I explain it? The principle is we sit in a circle. That's kind of the major event. We sit around in a circle, no desk, no nothing, in an empty space with chairs. And then eventually we fill that circle with other kind of presence. The presence could be simply a physical presence. People come into the circle and talk one-on-one. We ask people to do non-verbal exercises where you can't speak but have to communicate differently. That usually opens people up to a whole different way of communicating, things that they're really surprised about. We have small group circles, we have large group circles, we have improvisation. We sometimes take just time out and do something different, like a half-day field trip that people experience each other.
Change of
by just
location.
walking, you know, and talking. So all of these things are part of the methodology.
Okay, and you have worked in the United States for a few decades now. If you come to Europe and would do something something similar, working on conflict and mediation or reconciliation, what topic springs to your mind that would be addressed in Europe? Do you have any idea?
Well, maybe we should start more through my own journey, and then we can explore it from there. So since really since 1989, I've been working with for a good 15 years with 4-week summer programs where we brought together German students from German universities that included minority students, sometimes students with Turkish parents, or when not just Germans from German heritage, but students who study in German university who come from different backgrounds as well.
Countries,
and then on the American side, we had American students and mostly Jewish American students. And for the 4 weeks, the topic was how to deal with World War II, the Holocaust, and the repercussions of World War II and the Holocaust.
Right.
And that was a program that really was divided of a 2-week stay in America and then a 2-week stay in mostly Berlin and Poland to some degree. And so that's one of the kind of programs we've been doing, and 4 weeks are intense because again, it's not an academic program. It is, we travel, we work, we discuss,
you cook together,
we eat together. So that's one program, and given the fact that today's political landscape in Europe is still very much shaped by what happened in 1945. You know, all the settlements and resettlements of people, the current borders, national borders, are all the result of World War II, and the memory of these events are commemorated differently in every single country. That is one of the things that could be addressed. Clearly not the only one, but one that I've been working with. And that includes at some point, it did include at some point a trilateral meeting that included Polish students. So we had Polish American, Jewish American, and non-Jewish Germans, and really thinking what is the effect of the memory that was communicated, transmitted from one generation to the next. The stories our grandparents told us, our parents, our communities, how we commemorate, how artists chose to build a sculpture, how sites of atrocities look today, what do we see, why do we see it differently. All these things are part of these kind of programs. That would be one. Another one that kind of leaves the Europe specifically is the work with Palestinian, Israelis and Germans, another trilateral meeting. And again, this is not a political program in the sense of that we are looking for political solutions, but a reconciliatory program, a program where people are willing to go beyond their own loyalties to their large group social identities and are willing to explore new ways of communicating and listening and relating to people. And in these situations, for example, we have often Palestinian, these are not just students, these could be adults too, but Palestinians from the West Bank, sometimes from the Gaza, who never met Israeli face-to-face, because they're so separated by now. And some of the Israelis never sat in the same room with the Palestinian. They may have met them face-to-face, but never sat in the same room to actually talk directly, personally, and honestly to each other.
And did you observe changes over the years? The situation now when you do such a workshop or seminar compared to the situation in the 90s, let's say? How did people react differently then, and what were the changes?
So the work with Palestinians, Israelis, in my case, didn't start till 6 years ago. And there weren't many political changes, and so the groups haven't changed much either.
In the last 6 years, and
right.
Yes, okay.
So we just, if we work with people for a longer time, we see the changes in the people, but we don't see the changes on the political landscape. But clearly, there are changes. If you do it long enough, you begin to see how the larger events begin to influence the personal relationships of people. And we've clearly seen it with the student programs, the 4-week-long summer student programs, where we had American Jews and non-Jewish Germans part of it, and how things changed. A very brief example, in the beginning of these programs, again, they started in '89, the German participants were asked to bring documents, photos from their family histories, from the German family histories, and they just didn't bring any. They were unprepared. They half refused, half didn't really care about, half didn't know why they would do this or should do this, and so they didn't bring them, and that actually led to conflict within the groups, because the American Jewish students felt like, you know, why are you not bringing some material? Why do you not show us your history in your families? And after '95, that really changed significantly. And that was a generational and cultural change in Germany itself. People began to open up their grandparents' treasures, so to speak. Whatever, when they died, they found stuff, and people after '95 were German students were really prepared and brought documents from their time, and it was an amazing shift to just see.
So a new openness.
A new openness, and that these things are not just an issue of individual intention. An individual may want to do something, but if a culture doesn't allow this to happen, actually nothing happens. And so to see the interplay between the social and the individual or the personal is fascinating if one does this work over a long time.
Over a long time, yes. Okay, thank you. And one of the concepts that is important for you is the concept of unsettling empathy. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, I want to say one thing before. When I use reconciliation, and that's important to understand unsettling empathy. I'm thinking about a process. So I actually prefer to speak about reconciliatory processes. If I just use the word reconciliation, it feels like I already know what the end product should be. I know that before I even start a process, this is what should happen. And that's actually counterproductive. A reconciliatory process simply means that people are willing to move along a path where you look for new ways of communication, new ways of relating to each other. And in many ways, because we talk about groups in conflict, say the Jewish community, the German community, the Palestinian community, the Israeli community, but it could be in South Africa, could be anywhere. When people are in conflict, you don't know what the end result is, but you may want to try out ways of finding new trusting relationships, repairing broken relationships. And part of that is what I call unsettling empathy, that we need more than compassion. Pity certainly would be the wrong term. Pity would mean I pity you, but I'm not interested in changing anything. I mean, I feel sorry for you, but I'm not interested in a change. I don't want to change myself. I just feel sorry that something bad happened to you.
And it's a bit paternalistic.
It's paternalistic. Compassion means we come as equals.
Yes.
You have a story to tell. I have a story to tell. Let's each listen to our story and find compassion for what you tell me. You tell me whatever, I make an example up, you tell me that you lost a friend through a suicide bombing in Jerusalem. I say if I would be Palestinian, I tell you that my family lost the house because the Israeli government razed the house because they wanted to make space for something else.
Yes.
So we both tell a story, and it seems like we're on an equal basis. Unsettling empathy takes it one step further. We're not just listening to our stories, but we also ask, how do you respond to when I tell you my story? You may want to be compassionate, but maybe you're also upset, annoyed, angry, don't trust me, are suspicious that I tell you the wrong story, are suspicious that my story wants to drown your story, wants to suffocate it. And so unsettling empathy is, I want to really understand who you are. I need to get your feedback. And when I truly understand that I may no longer be the same person, that my assumptions about you, my assumptions about history, my assumptions about your community may have all changed, and assumptions about my own community. And I may not be the same person. It is unsettling in the sense of taking away the grounds on which you stand, the world, how you perceive it. It takes away your comfort. It takes away your sense of that you know what a stable, secure world looks like, because it was good for you. And now I'm taking you into account, and it may have to shift and change. It is a very interesting phenomenon when you see it happening. And it always leads to some change in people's perceptions, to some transformation.
Perceptions, and also maybe a change of identity or development
it changes
of development
a little bit of
identity,
and it asks you to take a risk.
Prefiguration, yes.
And the risk you take is that you have to step away a little bit from the solidarity with your own group, from the loyalty to your own group.
Okay, thank you. You have now given us an example where two people meet each other, and where this encounter leads to new perceptions and maybe development or even change of identity in the two persons. But you also work with the so-called trilateral approach, where you have three persons or three groups, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this. You have mentioned the example of the trilateral project involving Palestinians, Israelis, and Germans, and maybe you can talk about this or other constellations.
Yes, so you're right. On the one hand, you can talk about two groups in conflict, and then we could basically say it's a dialogue. I prefer to speak about encounter, but it's a dialogical principle. It's two people involved. You bring in a third group, it complicates everything. And here I prefer to talk about trilateral meetings. That is three groups that have an equal interest on equal conflict in an issue that we're looking at. I think one of the temptations, if we talk about Israelis, Palestinians, and Germans, one of the temptations is to say that the German role in a group with Palestinians and Israelis is to be a neutral party and be like a third-party approach. There are concepts in international reconciliation, in attempts of peaceful coexistence, to bring a third party that is supposed to have a neutral look at things and just help the other two people to get their conflict resolved. That's actually not what I mean when I talk about trilateral. It means like three groups are equally involved in the process. And it actually would be a mistake to think that the German participation in an Israeli-Palestinian group is that they know the answer, that they are neutral, that they can help the other two by being social caretakers or political caretakers, because Germany is so deeply involved emotionally, politically, socially, historically in this conflict that they can't actually take a neutral position. And that actually turned out to be extremely helpful if Germans themselves are challenged in the process and not take a neutral position. So it is an intriguing way of looking at this. There are lots of things to say that in political programs a third-party approach is necessary, but that's not the kind of reconciliatory work that I have in mind.
So this approach is a bit different compared to political negotiation. For example, when we think about the last decades where the United States or the European Union have acted as mediators, but it was perceived and presented as more neutral ground between two rival conflicting parties. So your approach is really more realistic in a way, taking into account the concerns and issues on all three sides.
Yes.
So another dimension I would like to mention is the concept of trauma. You've worked on trauma from a theoretical perspective, and you also use the concept of trauma for your own practical work. Maybe you can tell us about the background of this issue and how you apply your insight into trauma research in your work.
Over the years, I realized that if we just call what we do in reconciliatory process a dialogue, we may want to stay on a verbal, cognitive, academic, political level and just exchange ideas and realize that we have different opinions and then can fight over them. That has its place, whether you'd have interfaith dialogue or interpolitical dialogue, whatever it is, it's nothing wrong about it. But if you want to go deeper, we need to look at different things. And two things are really important that I realized. One is the power of memory, and I talk about the power of collective or social memory that gets transferred from one generation to the next. Always changing a little bit, but it's very strong, and people identify their national identities through this kind of memories that we decide to pass on from one generation to the next, in schools, in school books, in families, and so on and so forth. And the other aspect is trauma, the power of traumatic memory. That's really the connection. That nations and groups often define themselves because they share a common fate or a common traumatic moment. And they decide kind of, not consciously, but somehow it becomes clear what trauma a culture wants to look at. That defines who they are these days. And so you have to include in this reconciliatory processes a very good sense of the traumatic content and the effects of trauma on people. And from a slightly more conceptual or theoretical perspective, I would say what is really important to look at three different kinds of trauma. One is called, or what I would call historical trauma. It's an event that happened, but it came to an end. In the example of Jewish-German relationships, it's the Holocaust. It does not continue. It happened, it came to an end, but what we live with are the long-term repercussions and effects of that genocidal anti-Semitism. And that gets transferred from generation to generation. It doesn't stop. The event stopped, but the memory continues. But so we call this historical trauma and its long-term effects. Cultural trauma is a trauma where there is injustice at some point, an event that's also harmful and unjust, but it hasn't stopped. It continues to affect people. So for the Palestinian-Israeli example, the Nakba would be a good example. The expulsion of Palestinians from their hometowns in Israel in 1948. It was a singular event in 1948, but they are still expelled from their land. It continues. They are still discriminated. They're walled off the Gaza Strip and the West Banks. They are walled in, as most of us know. And so there's an ongoing conflict that started at some point but has not come to an end. And so in these cultural trauma situations, that has all kinds. It could be the historical trauma of 1948, but it may be the medical trauma of someone being wounded by a bullet in a demonstration, or it could be the emotional trauma of witnessing that someone got into imprisoned, or got killed or wounded by something. So it's an ongoing, very fresh, very immediate, very direct experience, and you need to work with people differently if we have a cultural trauma that continues. And finally, I make usually groups aware that we have chosen traumas.
Okay.
That's a complicated term insofar as it sounds as if you voluntarily choose something, as if it's arbitrary or fictional or not really true. But that's not the case. Chosen trauma means there is a real harmful event. But a society decides, or culture decides, that this event becomes a defining moment in who you are. If I use examples again, the Holocaust has become a defining moment for who contemporary Jews are. You could have chosen something else, but you can't, because it's so powerful what happened that you really cannot. For Palestinians, it's the Nakba of 1948, the expulsion from their homes. It becomes a defining moment for who they are right now. Again, theoretically, you could choose something else. Why not something under the British mandate in the 1920s? But that's not the case. And for Germany, within that triangular relationship, it is 1945 that defines who you are, with all the repercussions of the war and the realization of the Holocaust and the expulsions of refugees, the rape of German women by some of the Soviet soldiers. I mean, there's a lot of things that were happening, so it kind of 1945 is that defining year. And I often say, like, why did Germany after 1945 or after 1948 or after 1989, why did Germany not look at the Weimar Republic at its defining moment? This was a democratic model. They tried it out. It failed, but it could be the defining moment for German identity. The fact is, it's not. Somehow German culture decided 1945 is that which resonates most deeply. And that is really meant by chosen trauma, and to make people aware that we tell stories along these defining moments is a very good way of making people conscious about when they use it and for what reason, and when they don't use it.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our interview, and I want to give you the opportunity to summarize, or maybe you want to tell us a highlight of your work in the last decades, or maybe you want to tell us something more general about the strength of your approach. Feel free to use the last minutes.
So I will start with the critics of reconciliation work.
Yes.
The critics, and they could be just cynical people who don't believe into any political solutions, or it could be people who think really only political, who think unless you practically come up with political solutions, everything you do is just too personal, that it has no effect whatsoever. It's kind of nice work, maybe not bad, but ineffective. And my sense is that they underestimate the power of these kind of reconciliatory processes. Clearly they don't change the mindset of politicians who want to continue a certain kind of politics. But what it does change is it prepares people for a different time when there might be openings that you have not that you had not expected before. There are doors, small things, small gestures, small moments where you were unsettled through your empathetic relationship that repair broken relationships actually may shift your whole understanding of who you are in this conflict. And when the time comes, or even now when you see moments of where you could intervene or interfere or do something different, people actually do something different. And that is a power, it's a deeper, more profound power of transformation that happens. And again, if people say like, yeah, but that's not going to make any difference, I remind them of the fact that, you know, in November of 1989, completely unexpected and not anticipated, the Berlin Wall suddenly was open. What seemed absolutely impossible to happen, it suddenly happened. And if that can happen without a violent revolution, and we have other examples of it, but I want to use it here in Jena, that example of the Berlin Wall, or the wall separating to it. If that can happen, lots of things can happen. We think because politics are in a particular way right now, they will never change. We know historically this is not true. We only know we don't know whether it's in 5 years, tomorrow, or in 10 years. And I'm fairly hopeful that a situation in South Africa, in Korea, between the West Banks and Israel, they're not forever. But how do we prepare people for changes? How do we prepare people to become agents for change in the process? And that's the kind of work, that's when this kind of work actually becomes extremely effective.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Björn Krondorfer from Northern Arizona University, Martin-Springer-Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.